Sarah Mitchell had always been drawn to the rugged coastline near her hometown of Mendocino, California. The 23-year-old marine biology student found peace in the crashing waves and the salty breeze that carried the scent of kelp and adventure. On this particular Saturday morning in early October, she decided to explore a section of the coastal trail she had never ventured down before. The path was narrow and winding, carved into the side of steep cliffs that dropped dramatically into the Pacific Ocean below. Sarah moved carefully, her hiking boots finding purchase on the rocky terrain as she made her way along the edge. She had been walking for about an hour when she heard something that made her stop dead in her tracks. It was a sound that didn't belong in this wild, isolated place. A whimpering cry, weak but unmistakably that of a dog in distress. Sarah's heart immediately began racing as she looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. The whimpering came again, more urgent this time, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere below her on the cliff face. Moving to the edge as safely as she could, Sarah peered down into the rocky chasm below. The cliff dropped away for nearly 60 feet before meeting a narrow ledge, and beyond that, another 50-foot drop to the churning ocean. At first she saw nothing but gray stone and patches of hardy coastal vegetation clinging to the rock face. Then movement caught her eye. There, on a ledge barely 3 feet wide and 40 feet below where she stood, was a large German shepherd. The dog's black and tan coat was matted and dirty, and even from this distance Sarah could see that the animal was in serious trouble. The ledge the dog was trapped on was so narrow that there was barely room for the shepherd to lie down, and any wrong move could send the poor creature plummeting to its death on the rocks below. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand how the dog could have ended up in such a precarious position. There was no obvious path down to the ledge, and the cliff face above and below it was nearly vertical. It seemed impossible that the dog could have climbed down there on its own, yet there it was, trapped and clearly frightened. The German shepherd looked up at her and let out another pitiful whine. Sarah could see the desperation in the animal's eyes even from this distance. The dog's tail wagged weakly when it saw her, a heartbreaking display of hope that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. This beautiful, intelligent animal was counting on her for salvation, and she was the only person who knew it was there. Sarah pulled out her cell phone, hoping to call for help. But as she expected in this remote location, there was no signal. The nearest road was over a mile away, and the closest house was even farther. She was completely on her own, and every minute that passed was another minute the dog had to endure its terrifying ordeal. Looking down at the trapped shepherd again, Sarah noticed that the animal appeared to be favoring one of its hind legs. It was difficult to tell from this distance, but the dog seemed to be injured, which would explain why it hadn't attempted to climb to safety on its own. The injury also meant that time was not on their side. An injured dog, exposed to the elements on such a narrow ledge, might not survive much longer. The October morning was crisp, and Sarah could see her breath in the cool air. She imagined how cold the dog must be, trapped on that exposed ledge with nothing to shield it from the ocean winds. The weather forecast had called for rain later in the day, and Sarah knew that a storm would make any rescue attempt exponentially more dangerous, both for the dog and for anyone trying to help. As she stood there, trying to formulate a plan, Sarah thought about the dog's situation from every angle. The animal was clearly well cared for, with a thick, healthy coat beneath the dirt and a sturdy build that suggested good nutrition. This wasn't a stray that had wandered onto the cliffs. Someone, somewhere, was probably desperately searching for their beloved pet. Sarah imagined a family somewhere, perhaps with children who had lost their faithful companion. She thought about how frantic they must be, how they were probably driving around the area calling the dog's name, posting flyers, and contacting every animal shelter within 100 miles. The thought of their anguish, combined with the sight of the trapped animal below, strengthened her resolve. She knew she couldn't just walk away and hope that someone else would find the dog. In this remote location, it could be days or even weeks before another hiker came this way. By then, it would be too late. The dog was depending on her, and she was not about to let it down. Sarah had grown up in a family that valued compassion and action over convenience. Her father, a veterinarian, had taught her from a young age that when you encounter an animal in need, you have a responsibility to help if you can. Her mother, a nurse, had instilled in her the belief that every life has value, and that sometimes ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things. Looking down at the German Shepherd one more time, Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to find a way to rescue this dog no matter what it took. The animal's life was worth the risk, and she couldn't live with herself if she walked away knowing she could have made a difference. The first step was to assess her options. Sarah was an experienced hiker and rock climber. Though she had never attempted anything as challenging as a rescue operation on such a dangerous cliff face, she had some basic climbing equipment in her backpack, including rope and carabiners, but nothing that was specifically designed for a rescue mission of this magnitude. As she studied the cliff face, looking for potential routes down to the ledge, Sarah began to formulate a plan. It would be dangerous and there was no guarantee of success, but she had to try. The German Shepherd's life hung in the balance, and she was the only one who could help. The dog looked up at her again, and this time Sarah called down to it, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. "Don't worry, boy," she said, though she wasn't sure if the dog was male or female. "I'm going to get you out of there. Just hold on." The German Shepherd's tail wagged more vigorously at the sound of her voice, and Sarah felt a surge of determination. She was committed now, and there was no turning back. One way or another, she was going to save this dog. Sarah spent the next 30 minutes carefully examining every inch of the cliff face, looking for any possible route down to the trapped German Shepherd. The more she studied the rocky wall, the more daunting the task appeared. The stone was weathered sandstone, crumbly in places and slick with morning moisture from the ocean spray below. What had seemed challenging from a distance now looked nearly impossible up close. She knelt at the edge and called down to the dog again. "Hey there, beautiful. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere without you." The German Shepherd lifted its head and attempted to stand, but Sarah could see the animal wince as it put weight on its injured leg. The dog's situation was even worse than she had initially thought. From her new vantage point, Sarah could see that the ledge the dog was trapped on was actually smaller than it had appeared from above. It was barely 2.5 feet wide, and portions of it looked like they might crumble under too much weight. Loose rocks and debris were scattered across its surface, evidence that the ledge was not entirely stable. Sarah pulled her climbing rope from her backpack and tested its length. She had 60 feet of dynamic climbing rope, which should be enough to reach the dog's ledge with some to spare. However, she quickly realized that her rope alone wouldn't be sufficient for a rescue. She would need anchor points, and the cliff top offered limited options for secure attachments. The nearest sturdy tree was about 15 feet back from the cliff edge, a gnarled cypress that had somehow managed to survive decades of coastal storms. Sarah tested its stability by pushing against it with all her weight. The tree held firm, its root system evidently well established in the rocky soil. It would have to serve as her primary anchor point. As she rigged her rope system, Sarah's mind wandered to how the German Shepherd might have ended up in such an impossible location. She examined the cliff face above the ledge but could see no obvious path the dog could have taken. The rock was too steep and smooth for even an agile animal to navigate safely. Then she noticed something that made her heart sink. About 20 feet above the dog's position, there was evidence of a recent rock slide. Loose stones and fresh scrape marks on the cliff face told a story of catastrophe. Sarah realized that the dog had probably been walking along what was once a wider ledge when a section of the cliff gave way, leaving the animal stranded on the remaining fragment of rock. This revelation made the rescue even more urgent. If one section of the cliff had already collapsed, there was no telling when another portion might give way. The ledge the dog was on could crumble at any moment, and every minute that passed increased the danger for both of them. Sarah checked her watch and saw that it was already past 10 in the morning. She had been at the cliff for over an hour, and the day was warming up. While this meant more comfortable conditions for the rescue attempt, it also meant that more hikers might venture onto the coastal trail. The last thing she needed was curious onlookers who might distract her or, worse yet, try to help without proper experience. She decided to attempt a preliminary descent to assess the feasibility of the rescue more accurately. Sarah tied her rope around the cypress tree using a secure bowline knot, then created a belay system that would allow her to control her descent. She had learned these techniques during her rock climbing courses in college, but she had never applied them in such a high-stakes situation. Before beginning her descent, Sarah called down to the German Shepherd one more time. "I'm coming down to see you, buddy. Don't be scared when you see me moving around up here." The dog's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. and it watched intently as she prepared her equipment. Sarah began her descent slowly, testing each foothold and handhold carefully. The sandstone was even more unstable than it had appeared from above, and small chunks of rock broke away under her weight, clattering down the cliff face past the dog's ledge. Each falling stone made her heart race as she realized how easily she could accidentally injure the very animal she was trying to save. About 20 feet down, Sarah encountered her first major obstacle. A section of the cliff face had eroded away, creating an overhang that would require her to swing out from the wall to continue her descent. This maneuver would be challenging under the best circumstances, but with an injured dog watching her every move from below, the pressure was enormous. Sarah paused at the overhang and looked down at the German Shepherd. From this closer distance, she could see the animal more clearly. It was definitely male, and he appeared to be a young adult, probably 2 or 3 years old. His coat, despite being dirty and matted, was thick and beautiful, suggesting he was well cared for. Someone was missing this dog terribly. The shepherd's eyes never left Sarah as she worked to navigate the overhang. She could see intelligence and hope in those dark brown eyes, as if the dog understood that she was there to help. The animal's faith in her gave Sarah the courage she needed to continue. Carefully, Sarah swung herself around the overhang, using her leg muscles to control the pendulum motion. For a terrifying moment, she found herself suspended in midair with nothing but ocean and rocks below her. Then her feet found purchase on the cliff face again, and she continued her descent. As she got closer to the dog's ledge, Sarah could see the full extent of the animal's predicament. The ledge was even more precarious than she had realized from above. It was tilted slightly outward, and several cracks ran through the rock, suggesting it might not support much additional weight. The German Shepherd watched her approach with a mixture of hope and wariness. When Sarah was about 10 feet above the ledge, the dog attempted to stand again, clearly excited by her proximity. But the movement caused some loose stones to skitter off the edge of the ledge, and Sarah called out urgently, "Easy, boy. Stay still for me. I know you're excited, but we need to be very careful here." The dog seemed to understand the seriousness in her voice and lay back down, though his tail continued to wag against the rock. From her position on the rope, Sarah could now see the dog's injury clearly. His right hind leg was definitely hurt, probably sprained or possibly broken. There was also a gash on his shoulder that had stopped bleeding but looked painful. The poor animal had been through a terrible ordeal. Sarah also noticed something else that made her heart ache. Around the dog's neck was a bright blue collar with what appeared to be identification tags. This confirmed her suspicion that he was someone's beloved pet, probably lost and frantically searched for by his family. As she hung there on the rope, studying the situation, Sarah realized that her original plan would need significant modifications. The ledge was too unstable and too small for her to land on safely. She would need to devise a way to lift the dog directly from the ledge without putting additional weight on the crumbling rock. The sun was getting higher in the sky, and Sarah could feel its warmth on her back. But she also noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The weather forecast had been accurate. Rain was coming, and it looked like it might arrive sooner than expected. A wet cliff face would make the rescue exponentially more dangerous. Sarah knew she was running out of time. She had to act quickly, but she also had to be smart about it. One wrong move could result in disaster for both her and the dog. As she hung there, 40 feet above the churning ocean, Sarah began to formulate a new plan, one that would be even more challenging than her original idea, but which might be their only hope for success. Sarah ascended back to the top of the cliff, her mind racing with ideas for how to rescue the German Shepherd safely. The ledge was too unstable for her to land on, but she needed to get close enough to the dog to secure him for lifting. As she pulled herself over the cliff edge, she was already forming a new strategy. She emptied her backpack completely, laying out every piece of equipment she had brought with her. In addition to her climbing rope, she had a small first aid kit, energy bars, a water bottle, carabiners, a headlamp, and her backup rope, a thinner 30-foot length she typically used for anchoring. Most importantly, she had her climbing harness, which gave her an idea. Sarah knew she needed more equipment than what she had with her, but returning to town for supplies would take at least 2 hours, and she wasn't willing to leave the dog alone that long. The storm clouds were moving closer, and she could feel the wind picking up. Time was running out. Looking at her gear, Sarah decided to attempt a modified rescue using what she had. Her plan was to descend to a position just above the dog's ledge and somehow secure him in her spare climbing harness. It would be challenging, since the dog would need to trust her completely and remain calm during the process. Sarah called down to the German Shepherd. "Okay, boy, we're going to try something. I need you to be very brave for me." The dog lifted his head and looked up at her, his tail thumping weakly against the rock. Despite his dire situation, he seemed to sense that help was coming. She rigged her rope system again, this time planning to descend to a position where she could reach the dog without putting weight on the unstable ledge. Sarah clipped her spare harness to her belt and began her second descent of the day. The wind was stronger now, and it pushed against her as she rappelled down the cliff face. The ocean below seemed more violent than before, with white caps visible on the waves. Sarah tried not to think about what would happen if she fell. When she reached the overhang again, Sarah noticed that some of the rocks she had dislodged during her earlier descent had created a small pile of debris near the dog's ledge. The German Shepherd had moved slightly to avoid the falling stones, and Sarah could see that even this small movement had been painful for him. "I'm sorry about those rocks, buddy," she called down. "I'll be more careful this time." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and he watched her navigate the overhang with intense focus. As Sarah descended past the overhang, she began to swing slightly in the increasing wind. Each gust pushed her away from the cliff face, making it difficult to control her position. She had to use her legs to push off from the rock wall repeatedly, trying to stay close enough to reach the dog when she got to his level. When Sarah was about 8 feet above the ledge, she stopped her descent and tried to position herself directly over the German Shepherd. The dog was watching her every movement, and she could see both hope and fear in his eyes. He wanted to be rescued, but he was also terrified of the dangerous situation they were both in. "Easy, boy," Sarah said softly. "I'm going to try to put this harness on you. It might feel strange, but it's going to help us get you out of here." She unclipped the spare harness from her belt and began to lower it toward the dog. The German Shepherd sniffed at the harness when it came within reach, but he didn't try to bite it or move away. Sarah was encouraged by his calm response. She maneuvered the harness lower, trying to get it close enough for the dog to step into it. This was where her plan hit its first major obstacle. The dog was lying down, and with his injured leg, he couldn't easily stand up to step into the harness. Sarah realized she would need to somehow get the harness around him while he was in a prone position. "Can you roll over for me, boy?" Sarah asked, knowing the dog couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would encourage him to move. The German Shepherd tried to shift his position, but the movement caused him obvious pain, and he whimpered softly. Sarah's heart broke, seeing the animal's distress. She knew she was asking a lot of an injured, frightened dog, but there seemed to be no other way. She began to sing softly, a lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child, hoping the gentle sound would calm the animal. The dog's ears perked up at her singing, and he seemed to relax slightly. Sarah took advantage of this moment to lower the harness further, trying to work one of the leg loops around the dog's front paw. Just as she was making progress, a strong gust of wind caught her, swinging her several feet away from the cliff face. The sudden movement startled the German Shepherd, who tried to scramble to his feet. The motion caused more loose rocks to fall from the ledge, and Sarah watched in horror as a section of the rock face near the dog's hind legs crumbled away. The ledge was now even smaller than before, and the German Shepherd was pressed against the cliff wall, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah realized that her presence, despite her good intentions, was making the situation more dangerous for the animal. She hung there on her rope, suspended between success and disaster, unsure of what to do next. The wind was getting stronger, making it nearly impossible for her to maintain a steady position. Below her, the dog was trembling, either from cold, fear, or pain, probably all three. Sarah looked up at the darkening sky and saw that the storm clouds were much closer now. She estimated that she had maybe 30 minutes before the weather made any rescue attempt impossible. The thought of leaving the dog to face a storm on that crumbling ledge was unbearable. "Okay, boy, we're going to try a different approach," she called down. "I'm going to come back up and think of something else. Don't give up on me." As Sarah began to ascend, the German Shepherd let out a long, mournful howl that echoed off the cliff walls. The sound was heartbreaking, filled with desperation and abandonment. The dog thought she was leaving him forever. "I'm not giving up," Sarah shouted down. "I promise I'm coming back." But she wasn't sure the dog understood her commitment. Back at the top of the cliff, Sarah sat heavily on the ground, breathing hard from the physical and emotional strain of the failed rescue attempt. She looked at her equipment spread out around her and tried to think of what she might have missed. The wind was whipping her hair around her face, and she could smell rain in the air. In the distance, she could see a wall of gray moving across the ocean toward the shore. The storm was coming faster than she had expected. Sarah pulled out her water bottle and took a long drink, trying to clear her head and think rationally about the situation. She had learned from her first attempt that the traditional approach wasn't going to work. The ledge was too unstable, the dog was too injured to cooperate easily, and the weather was working against them. But she had also learned something important during her descent. The German Shepherd trusted her. Despite his fear and pain, he had remained calm and had tried to help with the rescue attempt. That trust was something she could build on. Looking at her equipment again, Sarah began to formulate a completely different approach. It would be more dangerous for her, but it might be the dog's only chance for survival. She was going to have to take a much bigger risk. But sometimes extraordinary situations called for extraordinary measures. The German Shepherd's howl echoed up from below again, and Sarah felt her resolve strengthen. She had made a promise to that animal, and she intended to keep it no matter what it took. Sarah stared at her equipment for several minutes, her mind working through every possible solution. The traditional approach had failed, and she needed to think outside the box. Then, as she looked at her spare rope and remembered a rescue technique she had seen in a documentary about mountain rescue teams, an idea began to form. Instead of trying to get the dog into a harness, what if she could create a makeshift stretcher or sling that would allow her to lift him without requiring his cooperation? Sarah examined her extra rope more closely. It was 30 feet of strong, dynamic climbing rope. Not ideal for what she had in mind, but it might work. She began experimenting with different knot configurations, trying to create a simple but effective sling system. After several attempts, she managed to tie a series of loops that, when properly positioned, could cradle the dog's body and distribute his weight evenly. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't standard rescue equipment, but it might be their only hope. The first drops of rain began to fall as Sarah prepared for her third descent of the day. She could hear the German Shepherd whimpering below, and she knew the animal was getting weaker. The combination of injury, fear, and exposure was taking its toll. "I'm coming back down, boy," she called. "This time we're going to get you out of there." She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Sarah began her descent more quickly this time, knowing that every minute counted. The rain was light but steady, and it was making the cliff face slippery. She had to be extra careful with every movement, testing each handhold and foothold before trusting it with her full weight. As she passed the overhang, Sarah noticed that the wind had died down somewhat, which was helpful for maintaining her position on the rope. However, the rain was creating new challenges. Water was running down the cliff face in small streams, and some of the rock was becoming treacherous. When Sarah reached the level of the dog's ledge, she was surprised to see that the German Shepherd was watching her descent with what appeared to be renewed hope. His tail was wagging weakly, and he had managed to shift his position slightly so that he was facing her direction. "Hello again, beautiful," Sarah said softly. "I told you I'd be back. Now we're going to try something different." She positioned herself about 6 feet away from the ledge, close enough to reach the dog but far enough to avoid putting any weight on the unstable rock. Sarah began to lower her improvised sling system toward the German Shepherd. The rope configuration looked awkward, but she had tested it at the top of the cliff and was confident it would support the dog's weight. The challenge would be getting it positioned correctly. The German Shepherd sniffed at the rope when it came within reach, and Sarah was encouraged to see that he didn't seem afraid of it. She began talking to him in a calm, steady voice, explaining what she was trying to do even though she knew he couldn't understand her words. "I need to get this rope under you, buddy. It's going to feel strange, but it's going to lift you up and get you out of here. Can you help me by staying very still?" To Sarah's amazement, the dog seemed to understand that she needed him to cooperate. He lay as motionless as possible while she maneuvered the rope loops around his body. It was painstaking work, made more difficult by the rain and her awkward position on the rope. Getting the sling positioned properly required Sarah to reach across to the far side of the ledge, stretching herself to her physical limits. Several times she had to readjust her own position on the rope to get a better angle. Each movement was carefully calculated, as any sudden motion could destabilize the ledge further. The most challenging part was getting the rope under the dog's injured leg without causing him additional pain. Sarah worked as gently as possible, but she could see the animal wince when she had to move his hurt limb to position the rope correctly. "I'm sorry, boy. I know it hurts. We're almost ready." The German Shepherd looked at her with those trusting brown eyes, and Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. After 20 minutes of careful maneuvering, Sarah had the sling system positioned around the dog's body. She had created loops under his chest and hindquarters that would distribute his weight evenly when she began to lift. She had also managed to secure a loop around his collar, which would help keep his head supported during the ascent. The crucial moment had arrived. Sarah tested the rope connections one final time, then looked down at the German Shepherd. "This is it, buddy. We're going up. Trust me." She began to apply tension to the lifting rope slowly, watching carefully to see how the dog would react. The German Shepherd tensed as he felt the rope tighten around him, but he didn't struggle or panic. It was as if he understood that this strange sensation was his ticket to freedom. As Sarah continued to apply pressure, the dog's weight began to transfer to the rope system. For a heart-stopping moment, one of the loops seemed to slip, but it held firm. The German Shepherd was now partially suspended by the rope, with only minimal weight remaining on the crumbling ledge. "Good boy," Sarah encouraged. "You're doing great. Just stay calm for me." Then came the moment she had been both anticipating and dreading. Sarah began to lift the dog completely off the ledge. The German Shepherd hung in the makeshift sling, suspended 40 feet above the ocean, trusting completely in the young woman who had refused to abandon him. The lift was harder than Sarah had anticipated. The dog was heavier than she had estimated, probably weighing close to 80 pounds. Her own position on the rope made it difficult to get proper leverage, and the rain was making everything slippery. But as she watched the German Shepherd hanging calmly in the sling, Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline and determination. They had overcome the hardest part, getting him off the ledge. Now she just had to get both of them safely to the top of the cliff. As they began their ascent together, Sarah looked up at the gray sky and saw lightning flash in the distance. The storm was intensifying, and they were running out of time. But for the first time since discovering the trapped dog, Sarah felt truly hopeful. They were going to make it. The German Shepherd looked up at her as they rose through the air together, and Sarah could swear she saw gratitude in his eyes. Whatever happened next, they were in this together now, united in their determination to reach safety. "Almost there, boy," Sarah whispered. "Almost home." The ascent began smoothly, with Sarah using a mechanical advantage system she had created with her carabiners to help lift the German Shepherd's weight. The dog hung quietly in the makeshift sling, though she could see him trembling from either cold or fear. The rain was coming down more steadily now, creating streams of water that cascaded down the cliff face around them. Sarah had climbed about 15 feet when she encountered her first serious problem. The rope was getting wet from the rain, making it slippery and harder to grip. Her hands, already tired from the morning's efforts, were beginning to cramp. She paused, hanging in her harness, and looked down at the German Shepherd below her. The dog was looking around nervously as they swayed slightly in the wind. Sarah could see that despite his calm demeanor, the animal was terrified. Being suspended in midair was completely against every instinct the dog possessed, yet he continued to trust her completely. "You're being so brave," Sarah called down to him. "We're going to take this nice and slow, no sudden movements." As they continued upward, Sarah realized that her biggest challenge was yet to come. The overhang that had been difficult to navigate during her descents would be nearly impossible to manage while lifting an 80-pound dog. She would need to swing both herself and the German Shepherd around the protruding rock formation, a maneuver that would test both her strength and her rope system to their limits. When they reached the overhang, Sarah paused to rest and plan her next move. Her arms were burning from the effort of lifting, and she could feel fatigue setting in. The rain was making everything more difficult, and she could see that the storm was intensifying. Lightning flashed closer than before, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very cliff face. The German shepherd whimpered at the sound of thunder, and Sarah's heart went out to him. In addition to everything else, the poor animal was enduring. He now had to deal with a thunderstorm while hanging helplessly in space. "It's okay, boy, that's just noise, it can't hurt us." Sarah tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. She had read about lightning strikes on cliff faces, and she knew they needed to get to the top as quickly as possible. The overhang maneuver proved to be every bit as challenging as Sarah had feared. She had to swing herself out from the cliff face first, then carefully guide the dog around the protruding rock. The German shepherd's eyes were wide with terror as he swung through the air, but he didn't struggle or try to escape from the sling. As they cleared the overhang, Sarah felt a moment of triumph, but it was short-lived. Looking up, she could see that they still had 25 feet to go to reach the top, and her strength was fading fast. The wet rope was cutting into her hands, and her shoulders ached from the constant strain. Worse yet, she noticed that one of the knots in her improvised sling system was starting to loosen. The constant motion and the dog's weight were causing the rope to stretch and shift. If that knot failed, the German shepherd could fall to his death. Sarah knew she had to make a difficult decision. She could try to stop and retie the knot while hanging on the cliff face, but that would mean leaving the dog suspended longer and risking both their lives in the worsening storm. Or she could push forward as quickly as possible, hoping the knot would hold until they reached the top. She chose to push forward, but she began talking to the German shepherd constantly, both to keep him calm and to keep herself focused. "We're almost there, buddy. Just a little bit more. You're doing so great. Your family is going to be so proud of you." The mention of the dog's family made Sarah think about the blue collar around his neck. Someone somewhere was desperately worried about this animal. She imagined children asking their parents when their dog was coming home, and the thought gave her the extra motivation she needed to continue. As they climbed higher, the wind grew stronger, buffeting them against the cliff face. Sarah had to use her legs to push off from the rock repeatedly, trying to maintain control of their ascent. Each push sent shooting pains through her tired muscles, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. With 15 feet to go, disaster almost struck. The loosening knot finally gave way, and the German shepherd dropped several inches before the backup loops caught his weight. The sudden jolt sent both of them swinging wildly, and Sarah fought to regain control. The dog let out a frightened yelp, the first sound he had made during the entire ascent. Sarah could see panic in his eyes, and she knew she had to act quickly to prevent him from struggling and potentially falling out of the remaining loops. "Easy, boy. Easy, I've got you." Sarah's voice was firm and commanding, cutting through the dog's fear. The German shepherd looked up at her and seemed to find comfort in her steady gaze. He stopped struggling and hung quietly once again, though Sarah could see he was shaking more violently now. The partial failure of the sling system meant that Sarah had to move faster. The remaining loops were holding, but she could see they were under tremendous strain. Every second counted now, and she began climbing with renewed urgency, ignoring the burning pain in her muscles. 10 feet from the top, Sarah encountered another obstacle she hadn't anticipated. The cliff edge itself was undercut, creating a small overhang that would make it difficult to pull the dog over the top. She would need to somehow get enough leverage to lift him the final few feet while maneuvering around this final barrier. As she hung there trying to figure out her next move, Sarah heard something that made her heart leap with hope. Voices were calling from somewhere above. Other hikers had apparently come along the coastal trail and heard the sounds of her rescue attempt. "Help!" Sarah called out as loudly as she could. "I'm down here! I have an injured dog!" Within moments, she could see faces peering over the cliff edge. A middle-aged man with a beard was looking down at her with amazement. "My God, how did you get down there? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I need help getting this dog to the top. The rope system is failing." The man disappeared from view for a moment, then returned with what appeared to be his hiking companion, a woman in her 50s. "We're going to help you," the woman called down. "My husband has climbing experience." The arrival of help gave Sarah a second wind. The bearded man, who introduced himself as David, quickly assessed the situation and took charge. He had Sarah secure the German shepherd's lifting rope to a more stable anchor point while he set up a proper belay system. "You've done an incredible job getting this far," David called down to her. "But let's get you both up safely now." With David's help, the final portion of the rescue went much more smoothly. Using proper techniques and fresh energy, they were able to lift the German Shepherd over the cliff edge in just a few minutes. Sarah followed immediately after, practically collapsing with exhaustion and relief when she reached solid ground. The German Shepherd lay on the wet grass, still wrapped in Sarah's improvised sling system, breathing heavily but very much alive. The first thing Sarah did was examine his injured leg more closely. It appeared to be sprained rather than broken, which was better than she had feared. David's companion, who introduced herself as Margaret, was already on her cell phone trying to reach emergency services. The storm was now directly overhead with lightning flashing and thunder booming around them, but they had made it to safety just in time. "You saved that dog's life," David said to Sarah as they huddled under a small tarp he had brought. "I've been climbing for 20 years and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Sarah looked down at the German Shepherd, who was now lying quietly beside her. Despite everything he had been through, his tail wagged weakly when she reached out to pet him. She gently examined the tags on his blue collar and found what she was looking for, a name and phone number. "His name is Max," she announced to the group, "and I think it's time to call his family." As Margaret dialed the number on Max's collar, Sarah continued to stroke the dog's head. Max looked up at her with those same trusting brown eyes that had given her the courage to attempt the rescue in the first place. In that moment, Sarah knew that no matter how tired she was, no matter how dangerous it had been, she would do it all again in a heartbeat. The storm raged around them, but they were safe. Max was safe. And somewhere, a family was about to receive the best news of their lives. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number on Max's collar. The storm was raging around them, but Sarah had insisted they make the call immediately. She couldn't bear the thought of Max's family spending another minute wondering if their beloved pet was alive or dead. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered, breathless and desperate. Hello, do you have Max? Please tell me you have Max." Margaret looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, we have Max. He's safe. He's injured, but he's alive and safe." The sound that came through the phone was unmistakably a sob of relief. Oh my God, where are you? Where is he? Is he really okay?" Sarah took the phone from Margaret. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I found Max trapped on a cliff face about 3 miles north of Mendocino Village. He has an injured leg and some cuts, but he's going to be fine. He was incredibly brave. A cliff face? How did he—" "Oh, Max, my poor baby. I'm Jennifer Thompson, Max's mom. We've been looking for him for 3 days. He disappeared on Wednesday evening during our vacation. We thought we'd lost him forever." Sarah could hear the emotion in Jennifer's voice, and it brought tears to her own eyes. She looked down at Max, who was resting his head on her lap despite his exhaustion. The dog seemed to sense that something important was happening. "He's right here with me," Sarah said softly. "He's been so brave through this whole ordeal. He trusted me completely during the rescue." Jennifer's voice cracked as she spoke. My children have been crying for 3 days. We have search parties out. We've contacted every animal shelter within 100 miles. How did he end up on a cliff?" Sarah explained about the rock slide and how Max had become trapped on the narrow ledge. As she spoke, she gently stroked Max's fur, and the dog's tail thumped weakly against the ground. Even in his exhausted state, he seemed to understand that good things were happening. "We're staying at the Mendocino Beach House Resort," Jennifer said. "Can you meet us there? Or should we come to you? I don't care about the storm, I need to see him." David, who had been listening to the conversation, spoke up. "The coastal trail is going to be dangerous in this weather. Why don't we meet somewhere safer?" He suggested the veterinary clinic in Mendocino Village, which made sense given Max's injuries. As they made arrangements to meet, Sarah learned more about Max and his family. He was 3 years old, a rescue dog who had been with the Thompson family for 2 years. They had driven up from San Francisco for a weekend getaway, and Max had somehow gotten loose from their vacation rental on Wednesday evening. They had been searching frantically ever since. "My daughter Emma is 8 and my son Jake is 6, Jennifer explained. "Max sleeps in Emma's bed every night. She hasn't slept since he disappeared. She keeps asking me if Max is scared and if he knows we're looking for him." Sarah's heart broke thinking about those children. You can tell Emma that Max was very brave, and I think he always knew someone was coming to help him. He never gave up hope. The call ended with plans to meet at the veterinary clinic in an hour. Dr. Patricia Wells, the local veterinarian, had been contacted and agreed to meet them there despite the storm and the fact that it was Saturday afternoon. David and Margaret helped Sarah carefully move Max to their pickup truck. The German Shepherd was still weak, but he seemed to perk up slightly when they lifted him. Sarah rode in the back with Max, keeping him calm and comfortable during the drive down the winding coastal road. The storm made the journey treacherous, with wind-driven rain reducing visibility to just a few yards at times. But David was an experienced driver, and they made it to the veterinary clinic safely. Dr. Wells was already there waiting for them, having braved the storm herself to help Max. The veterinary examination confirmed Sarah's assessment. Max had a sprained leg, some minor cuts and scrapes, and was dehydrated and exhausted, but there were no serious injuries. He's incredibly lucky, Dr. Wells said. A fall from that height would have killed him. You saved his life. As Dr. Wells tended to Max's injuries, Sarah found herself feeling strangely emotional. She had spent the morning focused entirely on the rescue, running on adrenaline and determination. Now that the immediate danger was over, the full impact of what they had been through was beginning to hit her. Max seemed to sense her emotional state. Despite his exhaustion and the veterinarian's ministrations, he kept looking at Sarah and trying to wag his tail. It was as if he was trying to comfort her, even though she was the one who had rescued him. He's bonded to you, Dr. Wells observed. Dogs remember who helps them in their darkest moments. He'll never forget what you did for him today. 20 minutes later, car doors slammed in the parking lot outside, and Sarah heard the voices of children crying with excitement. Max, Max, where's Max? The clinic door burst open and a small girl with blonde pigtails rushed in, followed by a younger boy and 2 adults. The moment Emma Thompson saw Max lying on the examination table, she burst into tears. Max! Oh, Max, we found you! The little girl ran to the table and Max's entire demeanor changed instantly. His tail began wagging furiously, and he tried to sit up despite Dr. Wells' gentle restraints. The joy and relief in that reunion was overwhelming to witness. Jake, the 6-year-old boy, was crying too as he gently petted Max's head. We looked everywhere for you, boy. Everywhere. Mom said you were on an adventure, but I knew you were scared. Jennifer Thompson, a woman in her late 30s with tears streaming down her face, looked at Sarah with an expression of pure gratitude. You brought our family back together. I don't know how to thank you. Sarah found herself crying too as she watched the reunion. Max was completely focused on his family now, his tail wagging despite his injuries, his eyes bright with happiness. This was what had made all the danger and difficulty worthwhile, this moment of pure joy and love. He was so brave, Sarah managed to say. Even when he was scared, even when he was hurt, he never gave up. He's an amazing dog. Jennifer's husband, Mark, shook Sarah's hand firmly. What you did today, risking your life for our dog. I don't have words for that kind of courage and compassion. As the Thompson family clustered around Max, Sarah quietly gathered her gear and prepared to leave. Her work here was done, and this was Max's moment with his family. But as she headed toward the door, Emma Thompson called out to her. Wait, are you the lady who saved Max? Sarah turned around and nodded. Emma ran over to her and threw her arms around Sarah's waist in a fierce hug. Thank you for bringing Max home, the little girl whispered. I prayed every night that someone would find him and bring him back to us. You're like an angel. As Sarah hugged Emma back, she knew that this moment would stay with her for the rest of her life. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone who needs help, even when that someone happens to be a dog trapped on a cliff in the middle of a storm. 6 months later, Sarah stood on a different section of the Mendocino coastline, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The memories of that stormy October day had not faded, but they had transformed from something traumatic into something deeply meaningful. The rescue had changed her life in ways she never could have anticipated. The story of Max's rescue had spread throughout the coastal community and beyond. Local newspapers had picked up the story, then regional publications, and eventually it had been featured in a national magazine about outdoor adventure and rescue. Sarah had been reluctant to do interviews at first, preferring to keep the focus on Max rather than herself. but she had eventually agreed when she realized the story might inspire others. More importantly, the rescue had sparked something within Sarah that led her to completely change her career path. She had always loved marine biology, but the experience of saving Max had opened her eyes to the world of animal rescue and emergency response. Within 2 months of the rescue, she had enrolled in wilderness first aid courses and begun training with the local search and rescue team. Sarah now worked part-time for the county's animal control department while continuing her graduate studies, specializing in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. She had helped rescue dozens of animals in various predicaments, from cats stuck in storm drains to a family of raccoons trapped in an abandoned building. But Max remained special. He had been her first, and he had taught her that sometimes ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things. The Thompson family had become like extended family to Sarah. They visited the Mendocino area regularly, partly because they loved the coastal environment, and partly because they wanted to stay connected to the place where their family had been reunited. Max had made a complete recovery from his injuries and was now a healthy, energetic dog who showed no lasting trauma from his ordeal. Emma Thompson, now 9 years old, had declared that she wanted to be an animal rescuer when she grew up, just like Sarah. The little girl had started a small fundraising campaign at her school to support local animal shelters, and she wrote letters to Sarah regularly, updating her on Max's adventures and her own progress in learning about animal care. The rescue had also led to some practical improvements in coastal safety. The county had installed warning signs along the most dangerous sections of the cliff trail, and the local hiking groups had begun organizing regular safety workshops. Sarah often served as an instructor at these events, teaching basic rescue techniques and emphasizing the importance of being prepared for emergencies. David and Margaret, the hikers who had helped with the final stages of Max's rescue, had become good friends with Sarah. They often hiked together now, and David had taught Sarah advanced climbing techniques that had made her an even more effective rescuer. Their chance meeting on that stormy day had blossomed into a meaningful friendship built on shared values of helping others. As Sarah stood watching the sunset, she thought about how that single decision to help a trapped dog had rippled outward to affect so many lives. Max was living happily with his family. Emma was inspired to help animals. The local community was better prepared for emergencies, and Sarah herself had found her true calling in life. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Sarah smiled when she saw it was from Jennifer Thompson. The message included a photo of Max playing fetch on a beach in San Francisco, his tail wagging as he bounded through the surf. The accompanying text read, "Max says hi. He still looks up at tall places sometimes like he's remembering his adventure. Emma insists he's looking for you. We'll be up for our annual Memorial Day weekend trip next month. Dinner at our usual place?" Sarah typed back quickly. "Wouldn't miss it. Tell Max I said he's still the bravest dog I know." As she put her phone away, Sarah noticed something moving along the clifftop trail behind her. It was another hiker, a young man who appeared to be alone and was walking close to the edge, perhaps too close. Sarah's rescue instincts kicked in immediately, and she began walking toward him. "Beautiful evening for a hike," she called out in a friendly voice, not wanting to alarm him but wanting to engage him in conversation and assess whether he needed help. The man turned and smiled. "It really is. I've never seen a sunset quite like this one." As they talked, Sarah learned that the hiker was visiting from out of state and wasn't familiar with the local terrain. She spent a few minutes giving him safety tips and directions to the safer viewing points along the trail. It was a small intervention, nothing dramatic, but it might have prevented an accident. This had become Sarah's new normal, always watching out for others, always ready to help when needed. The rescue of Max had awakened something in her that couldn't be turned off. She had learned that being a rescuer wasn't just about dramatic cliffside operations. It was about being alert to the needs of others and willing to act when action was needed. As the last light faded from the sky, Sarah began her walk back to her car. She thought about Max, probably curled up in Emma's bed right now, safe and loved and completely unaware that his story continued to inspire people he would never meet. She thought about all the animals she had helped since then, and all the ones she might help in the future. The coastal trail was familiar to her now, every rock and turn memorized from countless rescue training exercises and actual emergencies. But she never walked this path without remembering that October morning, when she had heard a dog's cry for help echoing up from the depths of the cliff. Sarah had learned that day that the most important thing you can do when you encounter someone in need is simple. Refuse to walk away. Whether it's a trapped dog, a lost hiker, or a child who needs encouragement, the decision to stop and help can change everything. As she reached her car, Sarah looked back one more time at the cliff where Max had been trapped. The memorial plaque that the county had installed there caught the light from her headlamp. In memory of all the animals who have been lost to these cliffs, and in honor of those who refuse to give up on the helpless. It wasn't specifically about Max's rescue, but Sarah knew it was inspired by their story. More importantly, it served as a reminder to everyone who passed by that even in the most challenging circumstances, hope and human compassion could triumph. Sarah got in her car and started the engine, already looking forward to her next shift with the search and rescue team. Somewhere out there, someone might need help. And if they did, Sarah would be ready to answer the call, just as she had answered Max's call on that stormy October morning when a German shepherd's cry for help had changed both their lives, forever. The legacy of that rescue wasn't just about one dog being saved. It was about the ripple effect of compassion, the way one act of courage could inspire countless others, and the simple truth that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to leave someone behind.